Hi everybody, welcome to Lecture 7 for California Labor, Campaign Strategies, Tactics, and Social Change. This week you have a relatively long reading by Marshall Ganz, or at least I would say a technical reading by Marshall Ganz, which really focuses on the United Farm Workers and how they develop their campaigns. I thought that this was a good moment for us to lay down at least some foundational definitions that really could help inform the rest of the work that we're doing throughout this class. And so here we're going to focus really on the idea of campaign strategies, tactics, and social change. And in large part because there are aspects of each of the readings that I want you to focus on that could help you really understand these ideas better. In this lecture, we will focus on 4 different things: theories of social change, campaigns, strategies, and tactics. What is social change? Well, there are numerous different definitions, and what I present to you here is not the only definition, but really tries to categorize in some way some of the sort of key aspects of social change. In order to create a theory of social change, you need to at least have some base foundation of what we call social change. Social change is often referred to as an alteration in the social order of society. And social change may include changes in nature, social institutions, social behaviors, or social relations, which is a lot there. And in terms of understanding these things, we can think about, when we think about social institutions and the construction of law, which we've talked about quite a bit in this class already, we can look at how the law has changed, or the Constitution has changed to be more inclusive of those who were non-white. So, for example, the Equal Protections Clause being added to the Bill of Rights is a switch to the social institution. In terms of social behaviors or social relations, post-civil rights movement, we understand the ways in which people interact with each other has changed significantly. We can look at race relations and understand that what's changed there is the type of overt racism that was allowable and very rampant throughout all of the country, but especially in the South, has changed considerably. The social relations between men and women about who's allowed, quote unquote, allowed to work has changed. These are all the kind of social change aspects that they're referring to in this definition. It's the notion of social progress or socio-cultural evolution, that over time society evolves and changes in many ways, and for numerous reasons, both for kind of moral and value-driven reasons, as I previously discussed, but this could also be related to technology or changes in economic systems, which kind of gets into that third piece. It could be a paradigmatic change in the socioeconomic structure. So in terms of the economy, this can be a shift away from feudalism to capitalism, or as we've seen maybe more recently, although given that many of you are probably a little too young to remember this, with the fall of the Eastern Bloc and the USSR, we saw the fall of socialism and moving towards a more capitalist society. So that's another form of social change. Now, in U.S. culture, when we talk about social change, it's often assumed that it is attached to a particular liberal or progressive agenda. That isn't necessarily true. When you look at various ways in which people discuss social change, it's envisioned differently and certainly is informed by one's different politics and belief systems. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a quote-unquote liberal agenda. Social change also refers to any event or action that has an effect upon a group of individuals that have shared values or characteristics, and acts of advocacy for the cause of changing society in a normative way. Here, what I want to get to is that when we talk about events or actions, a lot of it's around social movement theory, about how groups of people come together to affect change. For here, we can think about more recent campaigns like the Occupy Wall Street or the Occupy campaigns that happened all last year a year and a half ago throughout the country, that were fundamentally protesting the existing economic structure. Historically, we understand this as things like the civil rights movement, right, or the American Indian movement. That there are these different the feminist movement. There are different movements that have really brought groups of people together that share values and really asked for a social change. This type of social change, of course, would be very subjective in nature. In other words, based on the politics I previously discussed. So what is a theory of social change? Well, a theory of social change posits a philosophy or a hypothesis for how or why alterations to a social order or social structure occurs, or why it may occur. So we have so many throughout philosophy and sociology, and many of the other social sciences. We have so many different scholars that have tried to theorize why and how change happens. These theories of social change are central to these different types of theories, and there are some core themes or typologies that they can be categorized as. So, for example, some theories of social change are more functionalist, what we call functionalist, which means that humans have needs and societies constantly adapt to meet those needs. So, in other words, social change happens in large part because the needs of human beings have changed, and it is as simple as adapting to those needs. There are economic theories of social change. Changes occur because of conflict between economic classes in society. One of the most famous theorists, social change theorists in this economics framework or typology would be Karl Marx, who posited that the proletariat or the workers of the world would unite and overthrow the bourgeoisie, or those who were rich and in power, or also known as the owners, right? That Marx looked at society and said there were basically two classes. There were the workers and there were the owners. And he posited that social change would occur because of class conflict. Political change. As a group or nation state accumulates more power, they try to assert themselves as a global power. This is often met with conflict and movements for change. Here we understand this as what historically has meant. Historically, this has been connected to empire and to colonization, where even though a country tries to assert itself, people in different countries will fight back. We've historically seen this throughout the world, through different revolutions. The United States, in its earliest history, was trying to overthrow the colonial power of overthrew the colonial power of England. We have seen it in terms of what's happened in terms of Vietnam and North and South Korea, in terms of making political choices about capitalism and or socialism. We've seen it in terms of internal to countries, the overthrow of dictatorships that we've seen in Cuba and Venezuela, and we've seen it in Chile, right? So if you look at the history of the United States, and I know that I'm not giving a lot of specifics here because I want you to just think about it theoretically, we understand that these different forms of politics and revolution can lead to social change. And then finally, the last piece, which I've already given a fair amount of detail to, which is the idea of social movement, that social change occurs as a result of social movements, when a large number of people who come together for continuing an organized effort to bring about or resist social change. They rely on, at least partly, on non-institutional forms of political action. So for social movements, this could be boycotts, this could be protests, and any number of other sort of tactics that are employed in order to bring large groups of people together to create social change. And as I'll talk about a little bit later in this class, we'll find that unions have struggled, right, in terms of how they articulate their own theories of social change. And at different moments, unions have articulated some of these typologies. Some unions have been very functionalist, meaning that they were very driven about, we just need to focus on getting contracts. It's a very functionalist type of approach to unions. We don't need to care about anything else that's going on in the lives of our workers. We just need to focus on the contract at the site. Obviously, we've also seen economics being at the core of a lot of labor unions. We can look historically the International Workers of the World, otherwise known as the Wobblies, who embraced a lot of the Marxist ideology or neo-Marxist ideology, and really believed that all workers, regardless of their different rankings within an employment system, could really bond together to create greater levels of social change. And then you also have sort of newer forms of unionism that subscribe to what people have called social movement unionism, where it isn't just about being a worker and obtaining a contract, but that you need to also attach yourself to other issues, social issues that are important to workers. So in the more modern context, we see unions being very active in terms of living wage. We see unions being very active in terms of immigrant rights and immigration reform and other types of campaigns that that help promote a different form of unionism. Now, oftentimes you'll see that these different theories of social change will mesh together, and that's not surprising. But these are just some typologies to begin understanding what the different theories of social change are. And it may be that towards the end of the semester that I start asking you what your theory of social change is. So that's important for you to think about. What is your theory of social change? How do you think it happens? How do you think workers can make social change happen? There are some core questions that you should think about, particularly relative to both your readings as well as to any sort of study or video that we watch. What do individuals, groups, and organizations want to change? You should always be able to identify, particularly when we're talking about a lot of these workers' rights campaigns, what they want to change. And I think it's also important to note that even within organizations, especially like the United Farm Workers, we'll find that not all groups within an organization want the same thing. So start taking note of that. How does that create conflict? How do people negotiate those things? How do unions work to get beyond those differences? What goal or outcome do they want to achieve? This is also another core question to keep in mind, particularly as you're reading this Gans reading. What do the United Farm Workers or what do these different associations want to achieve? And how do they plan to achieve these goals? Just as importantly, I think it's important for us to think through these ideas of campaigns, strategies, and tactics. So what is a campaign? Most of you guys have heard this word before, or probably being old enough to vote, you've gone through a number of electoral campaigns. But I apologize if this is redundant to you, but I think it's important just to at least set some foundations here. It's an organized effort which seeks to influence the decision-making process within a specific group. You work in an organized and active way towards a particular goal, typically a political or social one. So, for example, a political campaign to elect a specific candidate or pass or defeat a specific piece of legislation. So we've seen this most recently, with the presidential campaigns or the mayoral campaigns. You'll see this particularly down if you live in the Long Beach area. The Long Beach election is coming up. This also could be a social campaign. This could be a campaigning against human trafficking or for human rights. It could be for environmental rights. Here locally, for example, we see a combination of both a social campaign and political campaign in terms of the fight on the rebuilding of the 705 freeway, because this has environmental impact issues on particularly poor communities. But at the same time, we also have a number of environmental issues that are also going to occur. So this is also another local campaign that is both about politics and social campaign. And it's important to note that campaigns can be both long or short in duration. There are going to be some campaigns that have a finite time period. So let's use the Long Beach mayoral campaign that's coming up. We know that the election is in 10 months. So that campaign will last 10 months. But we know issues like human trafficking or immigrant rights, they can go on for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, right? And so this is important to note that campaigns don't necessarily have to just be short in duration. It's also important to note that for an organizing campaign, particularly for labor unions, that there are particular laws that frame what an organizing campaign is. For labor unions, an organizing campaign refers to the time period before the official vote by workers to become unionized. There are rules and regulations that outline what unions, workers, and employers can and cannot do during this time period. I've uploaded a PDF file to the lectures folder that just helps you outline and take a quick look at what those rules are, right? And I think it's important for us to understand what's allowable and what's not allowable. Organizing campaigns typically involve developing and coordinating a group of workers who have similar workplace concerns, for example, safety, wages, and benefits. Meeting with and affiliating with a union, for example, unions like SEIU, the Teamsters Unite Here. I think it's also important to note that workers won't just typically go to one particular union, but a lot of times they will interview unions to decide which one they want to affiliate with. Then there's usually a period of information gathering, which is mapping out the organizational structure of a workplace. What are the reporting lines? What does the organizational map look like? Which units will be, are you able to unionize? Which ones are management? These are parts of the information gathering stage. They'll also generally survey workers' concerns so that the union itself can take on and develop a campaign that matters to workers. So, for example, some unions, when they're surveying, may realize that occupational safety is extremely important because people have been getting hurt on the job. But for others, it could be about the fact that they've been working without overtime pay. And so really going after having a campaign focused on fair wages, right, and the application of overtime laws may be critically important for those workers. Finally, you have the signing of union cards, which indicates individuals' willingness to join a union, and then you have a union election. So these are typically the steps to an organizing campaign for unions, all of which are part of a very delineated process that are mapped out in both law. Mapped out in law. So strategy is one of the strategy and tactics are two words that are often used interchangeably, and so I think it's important for us to be able to delineate the two things from one another. Strategy is the thinking aspect of a plan, of planning a change, organizing actions, or planning a campaign. Strategy lays out the goals that need to be accomplished and the ideas for achieving those goals. And it can be a complex, multi-layered plans for accomplishing objectives. It focuses on accomplishing a particular outcome or objective. And I think what we want, when you think about the strategy, it's the what, whereas tactics are the how. What do we want to accomplish? What is the overarching plan that helps us reach a particular outcome? Tactics, on the other hand, refer to the actions, decisions taken in support of achieving a particular goal or outcome. It's the art or skill of utilizing every available means to reach an end. In other words, understanding what resources do we have at our disposal and how do we leverage that to reach a particular end. Tactical thinking attempts to coordinate personnel and apply them to the best advantage. And they represent the doing part of the plan. In other words, the actions that are taken as part of an overarching strategy. As you go through the GANS readings, it's really important that you start focusing on strategy, tactics, and understanding the campaign. What goals do the United Farm Workers want to achieve? What was their theory of social change? And what strategies and tactics were used to help them achieve their goal? For GANS, this is really central to this idea of capacity building that he talks about throughout his reading. And I'll talk about capacity in our next lecture.